on behalf of VerSprite, I just want to welcome you guys to our VS Roundtable, Unfiltered Cyber. Today, we're going to be talking about a really contentious topic within the cybersecurity community, and it's something that you might actually have strong feelings on yourself. Today, we're going to be talking about why cybersecurity is not cared about within organizations. But before we go ahead and dive into the topic, I want to introduce everybody here on our panel today. So today we have VerSprite's CEO, Tony UV. We have our VP of Product Security and SecOps, Greg Mosher. We have our Marketing Manager, Courtney Bremlett. And we have our Managing Consultant and GRC Practice Leader, Larry Buffington. We also have VerSprite's CISO and Senior Security Consultant, Brian Puster. And my name is April Brown. I am the Marketing Director here at VerSprite, and I'm also going to be your facilitator for today's discussion. So this whole thing stemmed from a recent article that was published in InfoSecurity magazine that highlighted a Harvard Law School poll that stated around 40% of board members for organizations admitted that cybersecurity is not a regular discussion on their agenda, even though the same amount of board members also admitted that there is a need for the technology innovation in order to run their business. And so when you combine these, it actually creates a risk and puts these organizations at greater risk. So I'd like to open the discussion today with Brian. Brian, after working so closely with organizations from all industries, do you find that this trend of organizations pushing cybersecurity aside to be true outside of this academic poll? And also, what are some of the problems associated when organizations do this?
Yeah, so I have seen it in numerous organizations where security just isn't as much of a priority as it should be, or there's sometimes an inability to communicate about what level of effort is associated with security, what level of investment is necessary, and how to target it strategically. I do want to push back on a premise, though, of people don't care about security. I think people do care about security. I think organizations care about security. It's a matter of they don't know how much to care about security or how much to do about it. There's lots of communication gaps about what the organization is actually exposed to based on what vulnerabilities or threats exist. It's almost analogous to like an insurance industry, except without actuarial tables. So we're trying to communicate about these potential outcomes and about these issues, and we can point to industry trends, we can point to specific examples, but the data is not as robust for cybersecurity risks as it is for some other more hard data. I think it relates to the fact that exploiting cybersecurity risks is a crime, and so there's a little less data about how often that happens and what goes along with it.
Good, thank you. Tony, I'm going to go ahead and push it over to you, and it's the same question.
Yeah, no, it's a great topic. I think, what's interesting about that study is that, if you look at different industries, that number might fluctuate up and down. If you go to banking, finance, highly regulated, they see some of the impacts of non-compliance to security requirements versus like transportation, manufacturing, or other industries where, like Brian said, I don't think there's really an executive that's going to overtly say, I don't care about cybersecurity, but they may not understand some of the points that he brought up, and especially in those latter industries that I mentioned. So I think that if you think about like board members, they're thinking about like things like growth, they're thinking about market share, they're thinking about, cost cutting, especially in a pandemic. So those are the main topics in the board discussion. So if you're basically voicing cybersecurity, you really need to be able to know how to translate those cybersecurity themes, discussions into business impact. And that's difficult for many cybersecurity professionals, even at the CISO or CSO level, because they're looking at alerts, they're looking at, high level vulnerabilities or, incidents that are being reported by tools. How does that really translate to some of the business goals I opened up with, market share, cost reduction? For many executives as well, they have this perspective of like, well, they kind of look at it as like, if there's a flood, I have flood insurance. If there's a fire, I have fire insurance. If there's a cyber attack, I have, cyber liability insurance. And so it is having an executive that's a CISO to be able to look at that, to provide the net. If there were, to be able to provide the net of, these threats are likely because we have these vulnerabilities that are open, and this is the feasibility of exploitation, and here's the impact. I think if you look at those four variables, you can quickly change the perspective about how executives really consider cybersecurity to be something more at the top of their minds.
Thank you. I think that was a good point. Courtney, I'm going to go ahead and push the question to you as well.
Okay, I would agree both with Brian and Tony. I think there's definitely a disconnect between and the C-level. I don't think that they're trying to push cybersecurity aside. I just don't think they truly understand what is an effective cybersecurity effort by their cybersecurity team. And I think having the CISO, which is kind of like the middleman between your security team and your C-levels, I think sometimes too, that they are always, I think the average turnover of a CISO is 18 to 24 months. So every 18 to 24 months, there's a chance of someone coming in, hot-headed, wanting to change all the platforms out. So how are they going to be able to portray a message to C-levels if every, 2 to 3 years, new products are being used, new softwares are being used, new numbers are being displayed to the C-level suite? So I think from a organizational standpoint and workflow standpoint, I think there's still a lot of work to be done on those positions and how they communicate to the C-levels. And cybersecurity isn't a unique risk. It's just as important as the other risks that directors and C-levels are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So I think really focusing on what products are being used inside of a security team and having CISOs and C-levels that have trusted, talent underneath them to be managing those aspects. But that's from just like an organizational workflow. I think that has a lot to do with the stats that you opened up with.
Okay. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Larry, I'm going to go ahead and move the conversation over to you. What do you think on this topic?
So I think so far everybody is headed down the same path, and when it comes to companies and not caring about cybersecurity, two things come to mind. The first one is how cyber mature are the companies that were queried, because a very mature company is going to have a different answer than a company who is not cyber mature. And companies that aren't cyber mature, there's generally a lack of understanding of cybersecurity, and a lack of understanding tends to lead to an abundance of avoidance, which looks like a lack of caring. So you see the trend of now a lot of CISOs used to, and a lot still do, reported in through the technology structure and to the CTO or the CIO, and that being moved out now to report direct to the CEO and to the board, which helps improve the understanding and lessens the lack of avoidance and gives you an appearance of more caring, when it's all boils down to not understanding leads to avoidance. So companies are as a whole maturing, but those that are ahead of others have a better cyber maturity model, and they tend to do much better with it.
I like that. I agree. I think it is, it makes a huge difference where people are on their cybersecurity journey and how much they've already kind of looked into it in the past. Greg, I'm going to go ahead and push the question over to you as well.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, kind of echoing what the others have said. I don't believe that there's a lack of caring about cybersecurity. I think some of it is avoidance, as Larry said. But the reality is, though, I think it really does depend on what are the drivers for the company itself. As Tony mentioned, companies that are highly regulated, they have that external driver. They have that audit cycle that they actually have to adhere to, that they have somebody come in from the outside, look at their company, and they really, have to match and meet those. Otherwise, there's actually significant real impacts that a board can understand to the company. I think once you get outside of that, it gets a little bit tougher. And I don't believe, I think part of the original premise was that maybe like, people aren't caring and there seems to be less focus. I don't think there's less focus. I don't think anybody's deprioritizing cybersecurity. I think really what it comes down to is those that are not quite as mature right now, because they don't have some sort of external impetus, is that I just don't think they really know where to start. And it goes back to what has been said here. In a lot of cases is that it can't be translated and actually brought to the business risk that the board or the C-level suite can actually understand. And so I think that's really the main gap that we're actually seeing, that, from cybersecurity professionals, there's been some changes, I think in the past few years, as Larry mentioned, as far as, some of the different reporting structure. But I think we need to do a much better job of actually taking those risks that are out there, those risks that we know that are out there, and really getting those translated into business risk. Then I think you'll start to see maturity kind of across, companies in general, not just specific industries, actually start to mature. And I think we'll start to make some progress.
I like that. Yeah, I think everyone here today at least can agree that it's not necessarily a lack of organizations don't care, but maybe they don't really understand and therefore can't act on it because they don't understand what to do with either the information they have or the lack of information that they have. So Larry, I'm going to go ahead and move over to you for our second discussion question, and I'm going to open with you. So in the same study, Harvard suggested that cybersecurity is such a large risk because board members dismiss it due to their own lack of confidence. And I think you probably touched on this in a really great way. And it's their lack of confidence within their cyber attack mitigation efforts is what Harvard alluded to. So cybersecurity, I think that we've all just agreed, it's not really a take it or toss it issue based on confidence. Cybersecurity has to be a discussion somewhere. So Larry, why do you think organizations maybe have a lack of confidence in their own mitigation efforts? And where do you think the onus lies or the factors that contribute to that?
So some of it is related to the fact that things are growing so fast and moving so fast that tools are constantly changing. There's always a better tool coming out, and companies are bouncing around trying to land on the right tool, and everything produces different results. And different results have to be interpreted. And it again falls on companies that aren't cyber mature. And a lot of the people that are just starting into this, they haven't adopted a framework, a methodology of reporting the results to the board so they can understand it. So no matter what tool you use, you port that information into your framework so that the answers are understandable. You take the output of one tool and the output of another tool and send both those answers, they're going to look different. People won't understand them. So the board, the executives all need to be able to understand the data that they're getting. They need a uniform message, and we don't have that across the board yet. A lot of good stuff coming out to do it, but we're just not really 100% there yet. So confidence happens when they don't understand first quarter's report to second quarter's report because they changed the tools that they were using.
Okay, I like that. Courtney, I'm going to pose the question to you as well. What are your thoughts on this?
I would definitely agree with Larry. As a marketing professional and just doing some research on competitors, there are so many new products and softwares being developed every single day, and many organizations have multiple of these platforms across their security department. So the more products that they're using, the less visibility and ability to manage these projects. And there's a lack of security experts in a lot of these organizations to manage and maintain these products. So again, there's that disconnect just between your security talent, your CISO, and then your CTO. So again, they're trying to manage all of these products. There's way too many for them to get a grasp on, and then they're trying to report them to the board member when there's not really any proof of effectiveness for these platforms. I think that is the biggest hole, like Greg touched on earlier. Okay, we're going to spend $200,000 here and it's going to increase revenue by this amount. And we can't do that in cybersecurity. It has to be, or we aren't doing it in cybersecurity. I think it can be done if you look at, the average cost of a breach, the average budget that you should be spending on cybersecurity. And it's really not how much you're spending on your cybersecurity budget. It's just, are you using effective tools? And, are you reaching out for help to assist you in creating these workflows and these frameworks like Larry spoke about inside your organization?
Okay, thank you. So Larry and Courtney, you guys are both heavily talking about the tools that companies are using and how they're kind of bouncing around the tools. Greg, I'm going to pass the question off to you. Do you also think it's because of the tools that there is a lack of confidence in the mitigation efforts, or is there something else that you think?
I mean, I think that could be a small part of it. I think really what it is, though, is it's as we alluded to earlier, it's the communication coming from the security team up to the executive management. And the fact is they're not speaking the same language. I mean, executive management doesn't care about how many vulnerabilities were found during the last scan, right? I mean, it's what they want to know is they want to know, does the security team have a good view of all of the risk that actually impact the business? Is there a blind spot someplace there that they're missing? They need to know that. Are you covering all the risk? Do you then understand those risks related to the actual business impact to the business? Because not all risks are created equal. Some, you can't focus on all of them. You can't deal with all of them. So you need to prioritize and actually really focus on the risks that actually have the biggest impact. And then are they actually implementing the different mitigation strategies to basically reduce the overall risk, to leave yourselves with hopefully no or even very small residuals on those risks? And really, I think that's the challenge. I think the challenge is the way for the security professionals to be able to present that information to the board. And it's not output from tools, because as Larry said, they change all the time, right? I mean, there's new technologies, they actually have to change. And so that's really more than just the tool bag. It's kind of like, whenever you're buying a house, you don't care what hammer the carpenter nailed, your all your studs together with. You're more interested in, are they nailed correctly? And so I think that's the big challenge. So tools can be a problem, and I think tools being presented up and their output being presented up to the C-suite, I think just is not going to get the job done, and I think it's going to cause further confusion.
Okay, I love that. I love your point that cybersecurity is almost like a handyman and putting nails on something. So Tony, I'm going to go ahead and ask you, do you agree with Greg, or are you also on the camp of it is the tools? And
definitely I'm not on the tool camp, simply because, just like with any type of practice or trade, the tool doesn't make the professional be effective at their job. I think that in the Western Hemisphere, in terms of security programs, especially United States, there's a lot of over-reliance on tools. So I'm not as much, the tools really are meant to help, but oftentimes they're engineered without the proper context. I've come from tool manufacturers in the security market and can definitely attest to that. I want to focus on one thing that was, in this question around confidence, because really this Harvard study talked about the lack of confidence from the board members in their own programs. And I would actually agree with that. I would actually agree that there is a lack of confidence, because if you look at major breaches, security hacks that have affected, Fortune 50s, large organizations over the years, and then you have these SMBs and mid caps and maybe Fortune 500 and beyond that are thinking, well, if this major conglomerate with like hundreds of security professionals and two of each tool can't defend their castle, then, we probably can't either. And so there is definitely a fatigue there. And that's why cyber liability insurance has, increased in terms of adoption tremendously. And it's been a good market for those insurance companies for sure. Now, I think that the reason that there is a lack of confidence does build upon some of the things that we talked about today. It does build upon the fact that there is a lot of information, and many of us here today have already talked about that. There is these. I will touch upon the tool aspect, where tools are conditioning a lot of security leaders to just simply go to that one well for information and then take it to manifest vertically up to a C-suite, and that is the wrong approach. And if we just compare like how controllers, financial controllers, accountants, CFOs do their work, right? They're having to do a lot of analysis. And that's, I think, the main part that's missing by security leaders is the analysis. They want a tool to do the analysis for them versus them trying to take a step back and say, what does this really mean in terms of business? And oftentimes a security leader, they get so caught up in their own vernacular that they lose the vernacular of business, going back to things like business impact, market growth, cost cutting, ROI of, different investments. And what businesses want to know is, how is our liability going down? What is, we've invested X, how is our liability in terms of potential loss? How has that actually gone down? And I think that one example, and there's many others, is foreign to a lot of security leaders because they don't have the background. I'll also close with this. If you look at how most security leaders out there are trying to message security, they're having to lean on frameworks. And if you look at the preamble or the appendices of some of these frameworks, or who is involved in writing a lot of these frameworks, it's security people. So it's security people building these frameworks for security people, but where is the voice of business if you're going to have a framework to message to business individuals, right? There really should be a greater inclusion of, the majority of the people that are involved in these frameworks should actually be more business people that say, I want to understand, how does endpoint protection risk affect continuity service, or how does, from a monetary standpoint, how does it, maybe making an analysis on reputational damage, maybe making an analysis on opportunity cost for lost market share, things like that, which I just from observation is a lot more foreign to security leaders. So I think that is exactly why, going back to the confidence word in that question, I think that's why there's a lot of board members that just simply aren't confident in the messaging and the information that they're getting from their security leaders.
Okay, thank you. That was great insight. All right, Brian, I'm going to turn the same question over to you. What are your thoughts on this?
So I think the lack of confidence comes from a lack of understanding what's really being said. And it's easy to say that, that these executives have lack of confidence, but on the other hand, it's on the security professionals to translate those risks for executives. Baselines, frameworks, technology tooling for security, that's all, like technology, a moving target. It's always going to be. So it's up to the security professionals in any organization that has a CISO, it's on the CISO to translate the outputs, the information from those tools and different frameworks, and translate that into what the executives need to know, what they need to act on, and what they need to care about. And it's really important, especially in non-tech industry companies, to translate those out of tech speak into something that can be more understood by just business leaders. Because if we're using tech speak and assuming that people know what we're talking about, we're going to miss the mark every time.
Yeah, I have to completely agree with you, Brian. I definitely think that every industry has their own lingo, and it's hard to understand a language you don't know. So I think everyone here in this panel has brought up some really great points. And while not everybody really agrees on what the most defining factor is on the issue, I think that we can all agree that cybersecurity is a major risk for organizations, and that every organization understands this, but they need to take their understanding into an actual resolution. So organizations need help in understanding like what the next steps are, or in some cases, even how to start taking cybersecurity seriously and start the discussions between their board members and different C-levels and management in the companies. So Tony, I'm going to go ahead and start with you as the CEO for our last discussion question. And I'm going to ask you about how can people take the things that we're saying in today's discussion, and how can organizations successfully either implement or actually create cybersecurity that is properly in place and a proper plan and execution plan for their companies? How can we take everything being said today and turn it into actionable steps for these organizations?
I'm going to say that something that I've said many times in the past, organizations need to, it's good to look outward into frameworks and guidance and things like that for some sort of benchmarking, but there is now a time to think inwardly about what does the organization need from security in order to thrive. I don't think that question is talked about enough. What do we need from cybersecurity? Let's look inwardly about our capabilities, our goals. And oftentimes when you're doing security governance and you're building a security program, you start to look outward. Let me align to this framework. Let me get these tools in place to feed information that aligns to this framework. And then you're back to just simply reporting what, a lot of other security groups within organizations are doing. And the fact is, it's not working. It's not working. When I say it's not working, what's specifically not working is what is reflected by this Harvard study, the lack of confidence, right? They admit that it's not a regular discussion because a lot of it is just simply doesn't really align to some of the goals of what the board members are really talking about. So one recommendation is look inward. And I think that there should be a good discussion that is both collaborative and also, in islands where there's collaboration between C-levels. C-levels will basically say, what do we want to know about cybersecurity? What are the kind of the top things? And they're going to basically have pretty layman's terms questions. Are we protected? What is our biggest threat? Things like that, right? And it's the security program's responsibility to make sure that they answer those questions and more, like, what is our security debt? What is our security liability? How does it affect our business? How does it affect reputation? Do we have outstanding reputational damage by our lack of security implementation? These are more business focused questions that board members would be interested in knowing. So I also think that, security leaders, and there's a lot out there that have stellar backgrounds and experiences, but they need to start fresh. They need to have a fresh perspective and really being taking these high level questions from some of their constituents in the board or C-suite level, and to be able to go back to their information sources, whether it be tools, whether it be their resources or people, their managed services, and ask them, I have these questions, I want to provide these answers. Let's do a focus group on how to actually provide the right answers. What are the activities that we do today in terms of our security disciplines of perimeter protection, endpoint protection, vulnerability management, incident response, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that translates to answering these business related questions so that then we can bolster the confidence. So in short, I think that we need to kind of flip the approach on its head, look inwardly, understand the goals of your business, and then try to align security activities to reaching those goals.
So Greg, I'm going to go ahead and pose the same question to you. What do you think organizations need in order to take actionable steps from this discussion?
Okay, well, I definitely agree with what Tony was mentioning. I mean, really, I think the biggest part is that the leadership, the C-suite and the board level, they do need to be very, very clear with their technology people, with their actual security people, and be very clear on what it is that they need. And quite frankly, that's probably an open discussion because they don't necessarily know. Right? They, maybe even they need some outside help. They need to bring in some different SMEs, but they need to understand, okay, what are the questions that we should be asking and how do we align these activities really to our business goals? And from an overall standpoint, I think that's kind of step number one. Step number two, I really think comes down to actually, putting that investment and actually making the focus of really having an actual cybersecurity team, if that's actually what you need, whether you actually, work with a basically a preferred partner, or you can do it inside. Because what Courtney was talking about earlier, talking about the CISO, about the turnover on the CISO, If you've got a cybersecurity team in there that doesn't have the context, they don't really understand the business, they don't get time to work with those business leaders and understand how because all businesses are going to be unique, right? They're all going to have different challenges. If they're only focused on the security side, and that's a lot because it changes so often, they've got to keep up with it, but they're not also well versed in the particular business itself and basically the changing landscape of that business and the challenges of that business, they're never going to get on the same page. And so to me, I think it's not only asking those questions, but also really getting a nice, stable, basically security team in that can actually help with that can actually partner. This has to be a partnership, because it is not like financial where you can just simply throw a spreadsheet and all those guys or gals at the C-suite or at the board level probably came from that. They've been in business, they've been looking at models, financial models, and reading spreadsheets this entire time. They have not from security. So you've got to have that open trust, and that basically, once you've got a team and it is really a team from the C-suite down to the security working towards the same goals, towards the business goals, making sure that the business is actually protected and that you're dealing with all of the risks, then I think you actually make some headway.
I like that. Thank you, Greg. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and flip the question over to Larry. Larry, what do you think some actionable steps that people can take to try to either gain confidence or to take all the tips that we've given in this and start to actually execute?
Well, I particularly like Greg's response, and I think that the C level needs to have better communication, and they need to get an understanding, but they need an understanding in a language that they can grasp. That the geek speak is not going to work, and moving the CISO out of the IT organization, separating it out under the C levels. That's a first step, but you've got to have somebody in there that's going to speak a language that they understand, because once they understand, now the avoidance goes away, the lack of caring appearance goes away, communications start, and you start having that real discussion about what does the company really need to have. And I think Greg and Tony are both dead on that we don't have the mashup between C level and the security groups. The security groups are doing a great job, protecting the company, but if they're protecting the company in a way that hurts business, that's not working out. And you then suddenly have every 18 to 24 months a new CISO, because that just wasn't working for them. So I really think that is a very good analogy.
I like that. Yeah. All right, Brian, I'm going to go ahead and pose the same question to you. What do you think organizations need to do in order to take this discussion and make actionable steps on their security plan?
So I'm going to zoom back from that question just a little bit and talk about when organizations are building an information security program, when they're trying to get this started. The biggest indicator to me that an organization is going to be successful is whether or not they engage the security team and whether the security team engages them. The security team has to understand the business context. They have to understand the business needs, the tools that are needed, the considerations that go into all these decisions, and they can't do that in a vacuum. They have to engage with the rest of the organization to understand what the organization needs. Likewise, leadership has to engage the security team. If leadership is making decisions about a new platform or a new shift in business model or whatever, and they're not engaging the security team, it cuts off the opportunity for the security team to be involved with the planning process, which means that you are giving the security team a bunch of nails to knock down with a hammer, to Greg's analogy earlier. So it's really important to be involved in the planning process, and that can't happen without engagement. So just zooming back from what steps are needed, it goes back to communication and engagement. The security team has to be involved with what's going on with the business. The leadership needs to be involved with what security is doing and what the needs are there, and to work together to accomplish this for an organization.
I completely agree. All right. I'm going to go ahead and pose the question to Courtney. Courtney, what do you think about what cybersecurity needs for next steps for these organizations from this discussion?
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting to go into an organization's security department and ask maybe someone kind of a lower level or someone who's new, and really ask them, hey, do you know what your end goal is here, or why you're doing what you're doing, and as it relates to the business and their goals? I highly doubt that they would be able to answer that question, just because the nature, I feel like, of security experts is so technical, and they get so stuck into that kind of box of like, we just need this done, we need you to filter through this information. And I don't think it's been their fault for that. Again, from what I stated before, I think the security department has always been looked at as like its own unique department that needs to be handled differently, with it has different needs than your finance department, your marketing department, your sales team, which those departments are working together. In successful organizations, those different departments are working together every day. So I love that point that Brian said, that security needs to be right in there, with them understanding what the main goals are. And I really think that has a lot to do with the CISOs and like the directors of the IT departments. I think a lot of them might be using it too technical, or working too inside the IT department, instead of thinking, okay, how can I network with the C-levels? How can I get on their agendas? How can I talk with them? How can I meet with the CFO? How can I meet with the CMO? Like getting the word out about the importance of our IT department. Like, what do you need from us? Or what do we need from you to really make sure that we're working together as a team? I think if that kind of middleman that communicates between the department and the C-suites or the board members, I think that would be huge to increase the networking there. And again, I think that goes back to just organizational workflows and hiring someone has the personality, the teamwork, the leadership, but also has the technical background to lead people in the IT department. But yeah, I think it's just really getting the IT department integrated with the rest of the organization.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'm seeing a trend between everyone who's talking where you're all basically saying the same thing, that the communication needs to be talking about what board members need to be asking and looking internally at what the company needs. And there needs to be a blending between the CISOs and the board members and the IT department and the security teams, and everything needs to come together to do an open discussion of what the company needs, what they really need to hear. So everyone has a different language. Board members are very interested in how the company is going to run and the overall profit margins, oftentimes more so than the security team, who is worried about the technology and protecting the employees and the company overall. So I think that it is a great idea that every one of you guys are saying that the communication is the biggest disconnect here, and that in order to move forward, communication really needs to be top priority, and just start that discussion within your companies, even before maybe reaching out to a cybersecurity firm like VerSprite or anybody else. You guys need to understand what you either understand or don't understand, and what you need. So I think this was a really great discussion. Thank you guys. And I just really want to wrap up this conversation. But before I wrap up, I want to make something really clear, that while we might be a cybersecurity firm and we're all working in the industry, so we might be a little bit biased about how important and how much of a priority cybersecurity needs to be in the boardroom to different organizations, I think that everyone can agree that with the rise in technology and how companies are both relying on it and using it and creating it, cybersecurity is a major issue that needs to be talked about throughout every single level and layer of an organization. And whether you are looking at trends or you're looking at internally within your own company, I think it's really important. It's something that several of us hit on today at VerSprite, is that you and we need to understand that your organization is very unique. You have unique risks. You have unique goals. Your organization is very different from your closest competitor or even from the office next door. So you need to be looking at what your goals are and what your risks are before you even start trying to make plans about that. And so I hope that you guys took a lot of insights from this. I hope that you guys gained the confidence that you need in order to create a discussion within your company about cybersecurity. And I would love to invite everyone who's tuning into this to please continue the discussion. Cybersecurity risks are ongoing to your company and to ours and everyone else's. So I think the discussion about it also needs to be ongoing. So please put your input. We would love to hear what you guys are doing to try to open those communication gates or improve them, or your own security plan within social media or our YouTube where this video is going to be posted. Please let us know your own thoughts on what some of the issues are and what you're dealing with. We would love to hear from you. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I hope to see you on our next roundtable. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.